Okay, welcome everyone to our webinar where we'll be discussing the media coverage of plastics in Southeast Asia after some intensive research that was done by our team of fellows and our lead researcher, Patricia, Valerio, who you'll meet in a while, as well as our amazing partners at Break Free from Plastics, who you will also be meeting as well. I'm really happy to have each and every one of you here with us as we work to understand the media landscape for coverage of plastics and plastic usage, plastic policies. I'm going to introduce you first of all to our speakers. Today we have with us Jed Alegado, and Jed is a senior communications officer at for the Asia Pacific branch of Break Free from Plastics. So Jed will be speaking with us today. We have Patricia Valerio, who is our in-house media research manager at Climate Tracker. We have Heng Chun, who is representing today the Greenpeace the Malaysian arm of Greenpeace. So he's a campaigner there. Welcome. And we also have Rahyang Nusantara, who is currently the national coordinator of the Indonesia Plastic Bag Diet Movement. So I just want to extend a warm welcome to all our speakers. And I am Dizan Billy. I am representing Climate Tracker, of course. I would have been in contact with a few of you. I'm from the communications and outreach team at Climate Tracker. So welcome again, everyone. And from here, I'm going to pass you on to Patricia, who's going to take you a little bit into a dive into the report that we did. So Patricia.
As I was saying, I've been co-leading this project with Break Free from Plastic. So we wanted to look at how Southeast Asia has been covering like the issue of plastic pollution, plastic waste, like across different countries. So Philippines, I'm from the Philippines. We also had like researchers from Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So you might be wondering why we chose Southeast Asia as a region. So there's been a lot of research that a lot of Southeast Asian countries like contribute a lot to like global plastic pollution in the oceans. But in this report, we also wanted to link it back to climate change, since we are of course climate tracker. So later I'll talk more about that. But for now, I'll just like give a brief overview of the findings. I'll start presenting, but I have to turn on my video because of connection issues, just to like conserve bandwidth. But if you have any questions, like just feel free to like type them in the chat. I won't be able to see them right away, but we'll try to answer your questions later. So. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, no more issues. So like, I really just like wanted to like go straight to the findings already, because we want to discuss these findings with the other speakers too, and like see how we can like influence or like further shape the discourse on plastics. So like plastics were framed negatively across all countries studied for this report. So all the articles from Vietnam and the Philippines, for example, framed plastics like negatively. So 100% of articles, which I found really interesting. For the other countries, it was also like a high percentage, but for these two particular countries, like all of the articles we looked at from March 2019 to Feb 2021 framed plastics as a problem. So there's definitely a recognition that this is something that should be addressed across the region. Another finding is that the COVID-19 pandemic didn't really lead to like either increased media coverage of plastics or a significant change in the discourse. So like media coverage, for example, they actually like rarely mention plastics in the context of the pandemic. So in Vietnam, you can see that only like 3% of the sampled articles mention COVID-19. So I think like this could be partly due to the fact that Vietnam is a Southeast Asian country that has been able to curb the spread of COVID in the region. And another is that when COVID was mentioned in an article, it was mostly depicted as a factor that increased plastic waste. So like, I'm sure we all know now since we're mostly like staying at home. So we have like a lot of food deliveries. So like usually this will entail like plastic packaging and also just like the rise of personal protective equipment, which are like mostly made from plastics. So here in the Philippines, since I can see that there are a lot of like participants from the Philippines in this webinar, I'm sure you all know that we still have to use like plastic face shields, for example. So there's really been like a surge in the use of plastics during this pandemic. But like interestingly, like, as I said earlier, there hasn't been like a significant shift in the discourse, but in Thailand, there's been like a very slight shift. So like during the pandemic, at least like early 2020 until like early 2021, so plastics were framed as something that's necessary for health reasons. So for us, that was like interesting to point out. But I think, so this is also because like, especially early on in the pandemic, there was like a lot of anxiety about the risk of like surface transmission of COVID. So, but now that there's like growing consensus that this virus is more airborne, I think there's space actually for like non-profit organizations and advocates to kind of like shift this discourse. And of course, like journalists too. So a lot of the articles we looked at, they were written in a very simple way. Usually they were very brief, like they would be like very simple news. So there were very few investigations about like, this issue. So in Malaysia, I wanted to highlight this because we found this interesting. So some journalists pointed out that they actually like faced like physical safety concerns, like when they wanted to investigate, for example, like illegal plastic recycling factories. So later I'll show a quote that I think illustrates that really well. And I'll discuss these like two findings together. So like journalists in Thailand and Vietnam like lamented the lack of local experts on the issue. And then the Philippines is an outlier in that it used like a lot of like nonprofits as like primary sources in the articles. So if like some of you are like familiar with, like the political environment in the Philippines, so like relatively at least like compared to other Southeast Asian countries, like we have like a very like thriving space for civil society. So I think that's why like these nonprofits like figured prominently in the reporting on these issues. So a lot of these reports like tend to be like global in approach. So they would have like global figures and these would be used a lot in the reporting. But for like the journalists in Thailand and Vietnam that we talked to, they actually wanted more like country specific insights. So they weren't like satisfied with like a more global outlook since they thought like these figures wouldn't be like really relevant or interesting to their readers. And again, I'll show a quote about that later. So like a lot of articles, they mention like specific policy. Usually these like locally implemented plans. But again, I'm so what are the for like companies or even individuals or communities. So there were articles that did like feature a deeper dive into the policies. So like for Thailand and Vietnam, this would be focused on like the lack of comprehensive policies to combat plastic pollution. So there were also like a lot of regulations there, but like journalists like framed this in a way that like this set of policies wasn't really enough to like really like curb plastic pollution in their countries. And in the case of the Philippines, there were like laws that were like hailed as progressive by advocates, but the implementation here is what's lacking. So like if you're familiar with like RA 9003, so that got a lot of attention in like Filipino coverage. So like for example, advocates like even said that the implementation has been like quote unquote pathetic. So there were a lot of like strongly worded statements that I think like really depict the frustration of advocates over like the implementation of this law. And in Indonesia, it was interesting for us that like regional publications tended to highlight like the potential of grassroots initiatives, and like I'm just like mentioning one here, but we found it interesting that they featured like traditional bags from like different regions. So these would be like balase, besek. So like a lot of these like articles frame these as an alternative to like traditional thought it would be like beneficial for like SMEs in these regions. And Malaysia, like since China like banned the import of plastic waste into their country in 2018, so Malaysia has kind of been like the alternative destination for a lot of countries. So like plastic waste, like the import of plastic waste was like mostly framed as something of a national humiliation for them. So for us, that was like very insightful. And like maybe you've also like already noticed this in your own reading of like, you know, articles about plastics or like just like reading the news in general. But I think a lot of coverage in the region, like before on like reducing plastic consumption, so really like focused on the individual level instead of like reducing plastic production, which is like focused on like the level of businesses, corporations. So for example, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, so a lot of like company representatives, like these journalists said that they were either like less accessible or like they would provide answers, but they wouldn't really be like useful to these journalists since they would be like really vague or like they would just like be like motherhood statements that you can't really use. For Filipino journalists, they raised the issue of like the potential loss of advertising revenues as like a barrier to conducting like more critical reporting on the subject. So like a lot of publications in the Philippines, they're like profit driven, so they rely on advertisers to like be able to operate. So like some journalists that like wouldn't really like pursue a certain story just because they would feel that it wouldn't be published anyway because this company is an advertiser for their like because maybe like the company that was mentioned also an advertiser for them. And lastly, like plastics were rarely, if at all, discussed in like the context of climate change. So I think there's still like this like this idea that these two issues are like something that are like completely like separate from each other. So I think there's still very little awareness as example by their very nature, since they're made from like chemicals sourced from fossil fuels. Like every stage of their life cycle, they actually like emit greenhouse gas emissions that like contribute to climate change. So like we didn't really see that in any of like the countries reporting on this issue. I also really just like wanted to show you some like quotes from the journalists we interviewed. So we interviewed a total of I think 43 journalists from like these 5 countries. So like you can see like the full report after the webinar if you want to learn more about like these issues and like just their perspectives. But I really just like wanted to illustrate some of the points I raised earlier through these quotes. So this one. We have articles from our agenda setting and from our coordination with the Bali provincial government, since limiting single-use plastic use is a government's initiative. So this is someone from, this is actually editor-in-chief of Bali Post. So we found this interesting because like there was actually a conscious effort to have a close collaboration with the local government in like reporting on this issue. So for us, that was interesting because I didn't see that, for example, in the Philippines or in other countries. So this is related to the issue I mentioned earlier about like journalists in Malaysia, like having ethical safety concerns about covering like these issues. So like there was one time in 2019 when I went to a recycling factory that was burning plastic waste openly and causing significant pollution in the larger Sungai Petani area. We were chased off by a group of burly men who later tailed us for nearly 10 kilometers in their pickup truck. So like for us, I think even for like the Malaysian researcher, this was also surprising. We didn't realize this would be such a controversial issue that like these journalists would have to be chased by these like group of men. So for us, that was worth highlighting. Another one from a journalist in the Philippines who actually chose to be anonymous for this report. So when a reporter is assigned to cover that many issues, it's a challenge for us to keep a close focus on these kinds of issues and actually do other stories that go beyond the usual narrative. So this is related to the point about how a lot of these stories, they were very simple stories that would kind of like restate official announcements. And this was, I think, especially like prevalent during the pandemic because journalists like couldn't go out, for example, to interview like their sources. So a lot of them like would have to rely on official statements to like substantiate their reports. From Thailand. So some international plastic-related research does not include Thailand as a case study, so it is not attractive to our Thai readers. So again, this is related to the point about how there's a lack of local experts in like Thailand and Vietnam, at least as raised by like journalists from these countries. So they felt like just presenting like a global report wouldn't really be interesting to their readers. So like a journalist from Lao Dong newspaper in Vietnam. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, but so the newspaper does not provide specialized training on plastic waste reporting, and I don't think it is necessary to have such a thing. So we found this interesting because like before this, they were saying that there was like a lack of local experts and even journalists who had like the technical expertise to cover these issues. But they also felt like they were able to like independently study these issues themselves. So I feel like this gives us like a space for example, like groups like Break Free from Plastic and their partners to like provide more country-specific information and make these accessible to these journalists. And so this is really just like a glimpse of like the report and the project in general. If you want to like check it out, like after the webinar, you can check out the Climate Tracker website. So we've uploaded like the full report and also like an executive summary, which you can download. And like recently we recorded a podcast that like where we really just like have like a casual conversation about these findings. So I was talking there with other researchers who also worked on this project with me. So you can also check that out on like Spotify, Apple, or like Google. And that's it. I'll just like let Jed, like Rahyang and Heng also like discuss with us like their thoughts on this report and what like how the discourse can, for example, change in the region based on like the findings from this report. So I'll like, stop sharing now.
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So again, thank you for for Climate Tracker for really we're happy with we're really glad with the results of the outcome of this report. And of course, we've commissioned it, I think in January or February, you know, for this in light of the recent still the ongoing pandemic and also the lockdowns last year, in a lot of countries in Southeast Asia. We envision this report to help us break free from plastic Asia Pacific and also our members in order to really strengthen our media engagement on how we frame the plastic pollution crisis and how we harness narrative frames and messages, key messages that will help support our campaign, the overarching campaign, which is there's a plastic-free future is possible, and real solutions are happening, and these solutions need to have government and business support. And of course, we really need to veer away from producing plastics in the first place, and also veer away from the false solutions or stopgap measures that we're seeing. In general, I think we still need to do a lot of narrative shifting work, especially in the region, for really linking plastics to climate, the plastic production to the issue of climate change. As Patricia has mentioned earlier, of course, there's really a strong link, but we need to do more in terms of our messaging, in terms of our framing, and also with key moments that are really that media find interesting, like especially with the upcoming COP in Glasgow, Scotland in November. So all these, the movement around especially the youth strike, etc., those kind of activism and movement, we need to do more of probably connecting with change makers associated and involved in this kind of movements, and also alliance building at the same time. And of course, narrative-wise, really need to frame the issue well. Definitely, I feel that for the last few years, somehow there are gains in terms of shifting the narrative. So meaning we're able to really shift the blame from the consumers, from our side, to the producers, especially with brand audits, with different corporate campaigns that our movement and also the members have mounted at the national, even at the local level, community level. But I guess, of course, there's a strong pushback from companies, with their PR stunts and false solutions, plastic collection, plastic chemical recycling, and other false solutions that they're pushing, especially those that take advantage of low-income communities, like give me your single-use plastics in exchange for a kilo of rice or something. Those are prevalent narratives, especially here, in the Philippines. So we need to counter those. And then, of course, definitely the pandemic has hampered the reportage in terms of long-form, deeper dive articles, investigative pieces on single-use plastics, on production of plastics, because of logistics and travel restrictions. But we hope to do more engagements with the media beyond press briefings, via webinars, or via sending out of press releases and reactives and statements. So we need to do more, probably more long-term investments on how we push our narrative. And then, of course, definitely, probably the Philippines and Indonesia might have a strong advantage in terms of thought leadership, the CSO, NGO thought leadership in the issue of plastic pollution, because we have vibrant civil society space in those countries, and also there is a strong alliance, as we Alliance for Zero Waste in Indonesia and the Plastic Free Filipinas Eco Waste Coalition in the Philippines. These are already like somehow established thought leaders in terms of plastic pollution issue. So it also reflects the need for us to really build the movement in countries like Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. And also, I think lastly, in terms of really pushing for zero waste as the real solution, I think there's something we need to do more and really pitch to a lot of media. I know that probably the media, they don't like reporting too much on good news or feel good positive framing, but we need to really pitch these zero waste community stories well, so that they will pick it up, they will make a story about it, and they will be able to publish and amplify these stories loudly and meaningfully. So over to Heng or to Rahyang.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Okay, I will add some point from him. Before that, just introduce my previous background. I think I have a chance to involve in this plastic waste investigations since 2018. I think when China announced import ban in 2018, Southeast Asian country, especially Malaysia, became the next destinations to import all this imported plastic waste. And therefore, there are lots of international media and local media cover the story. I mean, like for local media, like Malaysian media, mostly they are questioning the authority, the efficiencies of authority to crack down the illegal businesses. And meanwhile, the international media such as BBC, CNN, Huffington Post, they all are picking up their own trash, I mean the plastic waste from their own country, and went back to pressure their own government to question that how come there's problems. I mean, how come the country, they want to send their plastic waste to other developing countries? So it turned to a huge debate in the past few years. So this is a point. And I think in this both international and local media coverage, I found that I think there's one similarity which has been highlighted in the report just now, which is the freedom of information. Journalists actually, especially in Southeast Asian countries, especially Malaysia, from what I know, journalists they are having hard time to access the right information from the authority because it's not required. So the way that I want to tell to the authority, to governments and the politicians, like freedom of information is actually important and good for everyone. If we manage to access the information, to know the waste trade data, to know that who is the company or illegal businesses who are causing the problem, causing the contaminations of environments, this enable the bad apple, we put the bad apple under the spotlight. And at the same time, it also fair to those businesses who are complying the regulations. So this is something that the point I want to highlight. Freedom of information is important and good for everyone. The second one is more to the I think my takeaway with for journalists, because since 2 years I work closely with the journalists to expose this plastic waste problem. I believe that I think all of us I think we have a capacity to deal with huge amount of workload. So the way that we can work together is we work closely with the media to organize some layman versions of reporting. For example, we publish a report, like even we have a scientific evidence, the information, we make it a simple versions. Make it how do we make it a simple versions is to visualize the story. Visualize the story with a simple, understandable infographic and videos. And then we let the journalists to share the story, and then that can reach more people. And this is something that we can try to do. And another ones I want to take one example is asking the make the issue more understandable. How do we describe a plastic pollution? We know that the plastic pollution is serious. Then what is that? How do we describe it? I read an article in online. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it's from The Guardian. It came from a ocean cleanup organizer. He said every day he do a lot of ocean cleanup initiative, but one day he gave up because he described the plastic pollution as this word. He say, beach cleanup is like mopping up a flood. Beach cleanup is like mopping up a flood, which means like everyone can do their best to clean up the oceans, clean up the plastic, but it's still not enough to tackle the global plastic pollution fast enough. So, which means that we need to promote recycling, we need to increase recycling rate, we need to keep our environment clean, we need to do lots of beach cleanup. If we do not tackle the problem at the source, if the global fast-moving company that do not take reusable initiative, we will still receive lots of the plastic pollution problems. So I think he did a very good job to describe the pollutions, plastic pollution. Like beach cleanup or recycling is like mopping up a flood. If we want to tackle the global plastic pollution, we should switch off the tap. Switch off the tap and at the same time increase the effort to reuse, to promote reuse reductions and also to do the cleanup. This is another point I want to highlight. And then the third one is regarding the COVID pandemic and plastic pollutions. We know that the plastic also provide convenience to the people, especially like the medical frontliner. A lot of people, they're forced to use it because they have no better alternative. I mean, according to some people. So the way that we can use it is like frame it as like single-use plastic is not necessary, is not really safe because there are some recent studies shows that the virus can remain viable on the surface with varying of time depending on the surface. For example, 4 hours on coppers, 24 hours on carpets, 48 hours on stainless steel, and up to 72 hours on plastic. So which means that if you want to tackle the COVID-19 virus, I think the solution is wash our hand regularly. There's no 100% hygiene. So what we need to do is reusable can be used safely if we wash it properly, if we wash it with soaps, if we wash it with the hot water. The bottom line is reusable items are still safe to use if we wash it with soap and water, and there's no substitute to this thorough hygiene. This is something that we could highlight. And this could also lead to another talking point, which is overconsumption. Now we face all these plastic pollutions because of overconsumption. The solution should be focused more to reductions. Reductions, the company needs to promote reusable initiative. Then we can tackle the global plastic pollutions. At the source. Yeah, I think that's all from my point. Over.
Thank you, Heng, Jed, and Patricia for your point of view, and I'll share mine, but allow me to share my screen first. Okay. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Rahyang Nusantara from the Indonesia Plastic Bag Diet Movement. I will share my point of view from the report titled Rising Media Coverage in Plastic in Southeast Asia. So the first thing I want to share with you is in the background, the report mentioned only 5 countries produce all of the world plastic waste, harming the marine lives. China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. In my opinion, it's not necessarily true because the last 2 or 3 years, we read information about imported waste from the global north country. In Indonesia, Europe, US, Australia, and other global north countries dump their waste in my country. Since the China National Sword Policy, Indonesia statistics shows that there are significant increasing of plastic waste for about 141%, and it's in the 2018 alone. In Indonesia, the USA is the second largest global plastic waste and scrap exporter along 28 years, the last 30 years. I think it should be in our mind that, well, Indonesia have a long coastline, and a lot of populations, but also this is the one of the problem that make it worse. We don't have the best waste management yet, and most global north country dump their waste in our country, it make it worse. So I think we have to also put this fact that most of the Southeast Asian countries face the same issues about the imported waste from the global north countries. The second point of view of mine is I congratulate people here, not only the speakers, but also the journalists and also the public that this happens. 93% of articles in Indonesia frame plastics negatively. And I want to thank specifically also to the non-profit organizations who are part of these efforts to push the narrative since at least 15 to 20 years ago. And although there are 7% maybe, it's a part of the big plastic industry, including oil and gas companies and FMCGs, to try push their narrative that plastic is good for the environment. They promote the false solutions. They promote solutions, technology that harm for the environment, and but the public is smarter than them. Sorry to say, for the big industries. But the challenges is in Indonesia. Instead of the media, the corporates seem prefer to push the narrative directly to the governments to lobby for a policy and promote their products or initiatives. So I think we have to try to also put this in mind, that our fight is not over yet. So Indonesia saw significantly more stories about plastic published in 2020. This is also about the good news happening in Indonesia, that during the pandemic, plastic issues became popular. I think one of the issues, is the biggest issues in 2020 is Jakarta announces that they are planned to implement the plastic bag bans. Effective on July 2020, they implement the regulations in shopping malls, modern market, and traditional markets. I think it's one of the Jakarta government's brave movements to announce this during the pandemic. If we compare to New York City, they postponed the regulations. Well, thanks to the corporate lobby, I think this year or next year, the New York City will also plan to implement the plastic bag bans. In the other hand, the Indonesian Institute of Science published their report on the increasing of the plastic during the pandemic, especially from the e-commerce and food delivery services and medical waste. But in my opinion, the issue seems only interest inside the environmental enthusiasts or communities. It's hard to find articles, especially in English, that published this report. Next point is the report also primary resources in Indonesian media coverage came from the local government, non-profit, community, and the national governments. I agree with this because the waste management implementation is a local government responsibility, including the reduction and treatment of the plastic waste. The national government's mandate is to create standardized regulations and instruction for the local government and as a supporting systems. Even for the database, the data on how we can reduce and manage the plastic waste is owned by the local governments. Non-profit and community based locally, mostly in Indonesia, and even if their coverage is national. But working collaboratively with the local governments creates a bigger impacts. The report also mentioned the dominant narratives frame in Indonesia, and there are several issues, dominant issues in Indonesia. If you have a chance to read the report, but I don't want to brag or to be narcissistic, but at least 4 articles mentioned in the report is my organizations is a part of them, especially on the plastic excise plan in Indonesia. That we have a petition to support the plastic excise since 2018 by our ambassadors that collected more than 1 million signatures. The petition has already received by the Ministry of Finance, and due to the pandemic, the regulations is postponed until we have no idea when the Minister of Finance will issue them. And the second one is the regional policy on single-use plastic ban. I want to tell you that since 2017, my organizations, the Indonesia Plastic Bag Diet Movement, assisted Jakarta, Bandung, and Bali to structure academic study, policy recommendation and drafting, campaign, and also the monitoring. We have launched the monitoring results of Bali regulations in our social media. There are a significant reduction number of the plastic bags, straws, and styrofoam after almost 2 years of the implementation. Next month, we will publish the Jakarta monitoring results. The number is very great, and I cannot wait to share with you. Also, we have analyzed all regulations in the 2 provinces and 55 cities in Indonesia. Mostly they are banning the plastic bags, and some of them is gradually reduce the plastic bags, and some of the cities also regulate not only plastic bags but also straws and styrofoam. Next point is the COVID-19 increased plastic waste generations. The Indonesian Institute of Science said that there are 62% increasing in online shoppings from the e-commerce and 47% increasing in food deliveries. Even though in Indonesia, based on the report, the COVID-19 related plastic waste is less pronounced in the media, there are significant increases plastic waste happening until now from these 2 sectors, e-commerce and food delivery services. And it impacted to the increasing plastic waste in the river for about 47%, and 50% of them are medical waste. And there are a lot of plastics used in during the pandemic, like plastic tape, bubble wrap, cling wrap, plastic rope, and cable tie. Last one, as mentioned in Patricia's presentation and also the report, traditional bags for alternative is happening in Indonesia. Besek, this one is the woven containers, and purun, this one is a bag. Is really popular in some of the cities and are now became one of the alternatives that we have. The source is produced locally and handmade, produced by the local people. Since 2018, my organization supports Banjarmasin government, the first city in Indonesia to ban plastic bags. to promote the purun or the woven bag as a substitute to plastic bags. And since last year, we also partners with other organizations to promote besek or the woven container to substitute for a meat packaging during the Islamic day that sacrifice the animals for religious reasons. And last things, there are key takeaways from this report that shared by the Indonesian journalists. There are 5 things to be considered if you want to write an article or write a report on plastic issues. The first one is to set the context and then use humanistic approach. Also provide the environment, economic, and social impact, and focus on dangers of plastic waste for the community. And also the most important thing is close collaboration between the media and the local governments. But we have to also face the challenges and find the solutions to find a way to answer these challenges. The first one is business and private associations representatives are harder to contact as a source of information, and information is only based on the government and non-profit organizations' press conference. Of course, this is not enough. We have to listen to all of the sectors about what they think, about what they doing about the plastic issues. So thank you, everyone. This is my point of view. This is our communication channels if you want to connect with my organizations. Thank you so much. Over to Design.
I'll just like respond briefly to like your like different like very valuable insights. So like regarding what you said about like, you know, like Southeast Asian countries like contributing to like a lot of plastic waste in the oceans. Yeah, I agree with you that there should be also like blame placed on, for example, like more developed nations in like their role for this. In the report, like I think we also highlighted that like I think there's been like too much focus on like the impact of plastic waste on like oceans, marine biodiversity, which isn't to say that these things aren't important, but we also like want to show that the impact isn't like solely focused on like marine biodiversity. So it can also be connected to like climate change, for example. So I definitely agree with you on that point. And thanks for like highlighting the different findings for Indonesia. I hope like the participants can also take a look at the full report to like check out like some of these findings for themselves. And as you mentioned, like the challenges for Indonesia, like a lot of the, for example, company representatives, they're harder to contact. So like usually the sources would be like local governments, and we saw for example from like Bali Post that there was even like a close collaboration with like the local government in the region. So like I think that says a lot about their accessibility to journalists. Regarding what Jen said about like supporting like journalists, so like one of the journalists I talked to actually, they said like for example, like reporters, they already have like a lot of training sessions. So this journalist actually thinks that it's the editors who might need more training, because at least in the Philippines context, for example, editors, they tend to be like, for example, they're not really out in the field, so they might not always be aware about these different issues, and they might not realize, for example, like why a certain issue is urgent. So like this person said that there might be space for like training sessions for editors and just like newsroom managers in general. When it comes to like positive coverage, there was some positive coverage. Usually these were the articles that would feature like corporate initiatives that would like rely on like just like one quote or like just quotes from like a single company representative. So they wouldn't have like any investigation or questioning of these initiatives. So I guess like there needs to be like more scrutiny of whether like these initiatives are actually sustainable. And what Heng said about freedom of information laws in Malaysia, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So I think that's also why like articles in Malaysia, when they discuss, for example, like these regulations, since like this information is hard to access for them, so there's no obligation for the government to give them this information. So a lot of these articles will rely on like restatements of official announcements. So like there's not much depth on these articles either. And like regarding the use of like more visual journalism, like infographics, data journalism. So Thailand, like there were like some articles from Thailand that would like use these tools, but usually they would be focused on like marine litter. So I think there's been like a lot of focus on marine litter in Southeast Asia, and you can see these in the reports too. But I think there's also like a bigger issue to tackle, like how plastics, like by their very nature, are actually like contributing to the climate crisis because they're made from fossil fuels. So I think that's like one of the frames that like reporters could also use in like future coverage. So that's it. I'll leave it to Dizan, and maybe there are like some questions from the audience about this. So feel free to like type your questions or maybe just unmute yourselves.
Thank you so much, Patricia and Rahyang and Heng and Jed. It was great presentations so far. Now we'd love to take some questions. So I haven't seen any. I've seen some comments in the chat, which is great, some good feedback, but I haven't seen any questions. Would anybody like to shoot a question to our speakers? You can feel free to either type it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask your question. I'm just gonna give it a couple of seconds in case anybody is unmuting themselves or typing. But in the meantime, until then, I'd love to get a screenshot of everyone. You know, we need to do this for social media purposes. So if you feel comfortable, please put on your video so that I can just get a quick screenshot. I'm seeing some people putting on their video. Oh, it's nice to see everybody. Hi, everybody. Hi, Gloria. Hi, Doris. Hi, Nina, Vanessa, Sonia. Hi, everyone. I'm going to give it a couple of seconds again because I see that people are putting on their video, which is great. All right, so I'm going to screenshot in 2 seconds, okay? 1, 1, 2. One more. Great. Thank you so much, guys. Now, does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? I'm gonna assume there are no questions. I'm gonna assume that that means that everything was really comprehensive and everybody understands. Oh, I see a question from Teresa. I hope I'm pronouncing
Maybe I can say it.
Yeah, you can ask your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just like wondering whether framing an issue in terms of the economic problems that it can bring, like emphasizing on the economic problems more, may help to trigger government shift in policy faster than emphasizing on the environmental aspect. Even though personally I feel like the environmental aspect may be more important, but like with framing it in terms of how harmful it is for the economy as well would be more probably a more important role in like shifting policy. Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Therese. Do any of our speakers want to give it a go?
Yep,
Yeah,
I can
maybe I
answer
can
first.
start.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So I agree. That's actually like a very interesting point you raised. So like in our report, like there was like a business journalist from Malaysia who mentioned that because he was working for a business newspaper. So if he would have to cover these topics, of course, like because it's a business publication, he would have to include, for example, like financial aspects, like for example, like profit motivation, stuff like that. And for like this particular issue, at least, he found it difficult to like justify writing about these issues for a business newspaper. So for him, it was hard. But I agree definitely that if you present like the economic aspect of it and how this issue is like adversely affecting the economy of these countries, I think it like might just like give like a push for the government to like really take this issue seriously. But again, I guess it's also challenging for journalists to do that because of like the nature of their publications, for example. So I'll pass it on to Heng.
Yep. Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, I think it's like I agree that using the economic perspective to highlight the issue. Like for example, in the plastic waste issue in Malaysia, what the journalists are using they are mentioning that the economic loss by the country due to the illegal trading, because there are a lot of illegal waste trade happening. So the message is also saying like if government did not regulate the illegal waste trade properly, the country did not earn any money. This also might resulting like corruptions, smuggling. All these are the costs that that should be included. In the country. So it's beneficial to some people, but not for the country. So that's the first point. And then the second point is to also highlight that what is the benefits or maybe incentive that the businesses can get if they make a commitment to protect environments or to reduce single-use plastic. I take one example, like in the restaurant owner, because in a restaurant, I managed to speak with one restaurant or cafe owner. Last time, he was so hesitant to not to give, to give the single-use plastic straw to the people. When the government announced the initiative to reduce single-use plastic straw, he did a few month test, and then after a few months, he brings a positive message to me. He say like, by reducing all these unnecessary single-use plastic, he managed to save like $30 to $50 per month, which is good for the cafe owner. The second one, he also saved lots of the trash. Like one day, the cafe owner they have to produce 2 bags of the plastic trash, but because of stop giving plastic straw, stop giving single-use plastic, he only produced 1 bag of trash. This is one of the example of a small business owner. Just imagine like if all the businessman, the cafe owner, they know the benefits, they know the incentive system of protecting environments, then there will be more people joining the movement. So which meaning that if we want to saving environment, reducing single-use plastic is also reducing our costs and managing our resources properly and save our money. So this is the point that we could highlight. And in the futures, protecting environment, reducing single-use plastic have to be, we must include 2 elements. The first one, we must incentivize the system. For those who are making commitment, they will get some benefit. Like this will also encourage more businesses to join the movement together. The second one is make it hassle-free. Make the system hassle-free, and then the consumer, everyone will join the movement together. Yeah, over.
Thanks for that, like really interesting perspective, Heng. Are there any other questions like before we end?
Yeah, I think you might want to promote the podcast as well.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted to add more. Yeah, like I mentioned in the presentation, we also have like a podcast. I'll like paste the links here too, in case you want to check it out later. So, and in the meantime, you can also like check out the full report, or we also prepared like a shorter version with just the executive summary.
Thank you so much for sharing it, Patricia. So as well, after this webinar, we'll also share with you via email all the resources, so the presentations, links to the podcast, and and of course the report as well via email. So you can look out for that in your email as well. So thank you so much for that. And I don't see any more questions coming in. So I think Patricia, Jed, Heng, and Rahyang, I think it's safe to say that we can wrap up. Do you have any final comments that you'd like to make? Any of our speakers?
Yeah, so just want to reiterate that we think Climate Tracker for this collaboration, and we hope to reach out and also continue the conversation and the collaboration, especially with young journalists who can help us shift the narrative in Asia Pacific in terms of the plastic pollution crisis that we're facing. Also, we'd like to thank Greenpeace Malaysia, Heng, and also Rahyang from IDDKP, as we know our members, for also gracing this webinar and sharing their insights. And also to all of you, we're around 68. Well, at one point, I think we've reached 72 or something. So thank you, to this rich network of young writers, journalists in the Climate Tracker network. Yeah. So yeah, we can find us Break Free from Plastic in Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and also breakfreefromplastic.org. Yeah, we're also in LinkedIn and YouTube. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Jed. Yeah, Rahyang.
Yeah, I want to congratulate Climate Tracker and Break Free from Plastic for the report. It's very insightful. I think it's a report that mandatory for every communications professionals and communication students to learn about the content analysis of the media. And for us in the nonprofits, it's also very helpful to build our strategy, to push the narrative if we understand what the media says in their channels. And I hope this is not the only report about the media, listening the media coverage of plastics, and I hope there's more report and updated in the future. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Patricia, is there anything else you'd like to say, or?
I'm good. I would just encourage everyone to check out the report.
Yeah.
And like the podcast. And we'll also like send you like resources. Design will send you the resources after the webinar.
Yeah.
So you can check those out.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you so much again for joining us. It was great. I learned a lot as well. So, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.